The descendants of Nazi officers are living among us today, and some of their stories will absolutely blow your mind. But before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button because this journey gets darker than you can imagine. Today, we're counting down 15 of the most insane descendants of Nazi officers, and I promise you, number 7 will leave you speechless. We're talking about a descendant who actually wore a recreation of their grandfather's SS uniform to a family gathering. Yes, you heard that right, but we'll get to that. Let's start with number 15. Katrin Himmler, the woman who married a Jew. Heinrich Himmler, the name alone sends chills down your spine. As the head of the SS and one of the main architects of the Holocaust, he orchestrated the murder of 6 million Jews. He was pure evil in human form. Now meet his great niece, Katrin Himmler. In 2006, Katrin did something that would have made her great uncle's blood boil. She fell in love with and married an Israeli man, the son of Holocaust survivors. Let that sink in. The great niece of the man who tried to exterminate the Jewish people married into a family that survived his genocide. But Katrin didn't stop there. She became a political scientist and wrote a book called The Himmler Brothers, exposing the crimes of her family and refusing to let their legacy be forgotten. She spent her entire life trying to atone for sins she never committed. In interviews, Katrin has said, "I cannot undo what my family did, but I can make sure the world never forgets." She's raised her children to know the truth about their ancestry, and she's dedicated her life to fighting the very ideology her great uncle championed. Talk about redemption. Number 14. Rainer Höss, the commandant's grandson who faces schools. Rudolf Höss wasn't just any Nazi officer. He was the commandant of Auschwitz, the man who personally oversaw the murder of over 1 million people. He perfected the use of Zyklon B gas and turned murder into an industrial process. His grandson, Rainer Höss, grew up in a household that glorified the Nazi regime. His father would tell him bedtime stories about the glory days of the Third Reich. Family gatherings were filled with Nazi memorabilia and quiet reverence for what could have been. But everything changed when Rainer was 15. He found his grandfather's diary hidden in the attic. Page after page detailed the horrific experiments, the mass murders, the screams of children. Rainer read it all in one night, and by morning, he was a different person. Today, Rainer does something extraordinary. He travels to schools across Germany and tells students, "I am the grandson of the Auschwitz commandant, and I'm here to tell you that evil isn't something that happens to other families. It happened to mine." He's faced death threats from neo-Nazis who call him a traitor, but Rainer doesn't care. He's on a mission to make sure his grandfather's crimes are never repeated. In one powerful moment during a school visit, a student asked him, "Do you feel guilty for what your grandfather did?" Rainer's response, "Every single day. But I've learned that the only way to honor the victims is to make sure their stories live on through me." Number 13. Nicholas Frank, the son who wished his father burned. Hans Frank was known as the Butcher of Poland. As the Nazi governor of occupied Poland, he was responsible for the deaths of millions. When he was finally captured and brought to trial at Nuremberg, he showed no remorse. His son, Nicholas Frank, was just 7 years old when his father was hanged for war crimes. Most children would mourn their father's death, not Nicholas. In fact, Nicholas wrote a book called My Father, A Settlement, where he openly expressed his hatred for his father. He carries a photo of his father's corpse, taken moments after he was hanged, in his wallet. When asked why, he said, "To remind myself that justice was served." But here's the disturbing part. Nicholas has admitted that he visits his father's grave once a year, not to pay respects, but to spit on it. He's given hundreds of interviews where he said, "I wish he had burned alive instead of being hanged. He deserved worse." Some psychologists say Nicholas is traumatized, that his hatred is a coping mechanism, but Nicholas disagrees. He says he's perfectly sane and that the world needs to know that even the children of monsters can see them for what they truly were. Love him or hate him, you can't deny Nicholas Frank refuses to let his father's legacy be romanticized. Number 12. Bettina Göring, the great niece who ended her bloodline. Hermann Göring, Hitler's right-hand man, the commander of the Luftwaffe, a man so obsessed with power and wealth that he looted art from Jewish families and lived in obscene luxury while millions starved. His great niece, Bettina Göring, made a decision that shocked the world. She had herself sterilized. In an interview, Bettina explained, "I didn't want to pass on the Göring genes. I didn't want there to be any chance that someone with my blood could do what my great-uncle did." Her brother Matthias did the same thing. Both siblings agreed that their family line needed to end with them. Now, some might say that's extreme. After all, Bettina and Matthias weren't responsible for their great-uncle's crimes. But Bettina sees it differently. She said, "Every time I look in the mirror, I see his eyes. Every time I hear my last name, I hear the screams of his victims. I couldn't bring a child into this world knowing they'd carry that burden." Today, Bettina works as a nurse, living a quiet life far from the spotlight. She's refused every offer to write a book or do a documentary. She just wants the Göring name to fade into history. And when she dies, it will.
Number 11. Martin Adolf Bormann Jr., the priest who rejected his father. Martin Bormann was Hitler's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. He was ruthless, calculating, and absolutely loyal to the Führer until the very end. His son, Martin Adolf Bormann Jr., could have followed in his father's footsteps. Instead, he became a Catholic priest. You heard that right. The son of one of Hitler's closest advisors dedicated his life to God. But here's where this story gets even more fascinating. In the 1960s, Martin Jr. was sent to the Congo as a missionary. One day, while traveling through a remote village, he was confronted by a group of armed rebels who were about to execute him. They demanded to know who he was. In broken French, Martin explained, "I am a priest. I am here to help." One of the rebels laughed and said, "You're lying. You're German. You're probably a spy." In that moment, Martin made a decision that saved his life. He removed his priest's collar and showed them a small scar on his chest, a scar from a childhood injury. Then he said, "My father was Martin Bormann. I carry his name, but not his sins. I am here to atone." The rebels, many of whom had learned about World War II in school, were stunned. They let him go. Martin spent the rest of his life in Africa, building schools and churches. When he died in 2013, he was buried in a simple grave with no mention of his father's name, just the way he wanted it. Number 10. Wolf Rudiger Hess, the son who defended a monster. Rudolf Hess was Hitler's deputy and one of the earliest members of the Nazi Party. After the war, he was sentenced to life in prison at Spandau Prison in Berlin, where he died in 1987 under mysterious circumstances. His son, Wolf Rudiger Hess, spent his entire life doing something that will make your blood boil. He defended him. Wolf became a neo-Nazi activist, writing books and giving speeches claiming his father was innocent. He called the Nuremberg trials a show trial and insisted that the Holocaust was exaggerated propaganda. But here's where this story gets even more disturbing. Wolf organized annual marches in honor of his father, attracting thousands of neo-Nazis from across Europe. These marches became so violent and controversial that the German government eventually banned them. Wolf also filed multiple lawsuits trying to get his father's prison records declassified, claiming he was murdered by British intelligence. To this day, no evidence supports his claims. When Wolf died in 2001, his funeral turned into a neo-Nazi rally. Hundreds showed up wearing swastikas and giving Nazi salutes. Unlike the other descendants on this list, Wolf Rudiger Hess never rejected his father's ideology. He embraced it defended it, and spread it. He's a reminder that not all descendants chose redemption. Some chose to carry the torch of hatred forward. Number 9. Gudrun Berwitz, the daughter who never stopped believing. Heinrich Himmler's daughter Gudrun was the apple of his father's eye. He called her Puppy, little doll, and she adored him. Even after the war, even after the truth came out. Gudrun spent her entire life defending her father. She joined a secret organization called Stille Health, Silent Help, which helped Nazi war criminals escape justice. She visited imprisoned Nazis, provided them with money, and campaigned for their release. In interviews, Gudrun said, "My father was a good man who was following orders. He loved his country." When confronted with evidence of the Holocaust, she called it Allied propaganda. Gudrun never married, never had children, and dedicated her entire existence to preserving her father's legacy. She kept a shrine to him in her home, filled with his photos, letters, and personal belongings. She died in 2018 at the age of 88, still believing her father was a hero. German intelligence services had been monitoring her for decades because of her connections to neo-Nazi groups. Even in her final years, she was helping wanted war criminals hide from authorities. Gudrun Berwitz is proof that sometimes love truly is blind. Number 8. Etta Goering, the daughter who lost everything. Hermann Goering's daughter Etta was born into unimaginable wealth and privilege. As a child, she lived in a palace filled with stolen art, wore dresses made from the finest fabrics, and was treated like Nazi royalty. Then, overnight, it all disappeared. When Goering was captured and sentenced to death at Nuremberg, little Etta's world collapsed. The palace was seized, the art returned, and her father took his own life the night before his execution by swallowing a cyanide capsule. Etta was just 13 years old. She spent the rest of her life trying to reclaim her father's stolen wealth. She filed lawsuit after lawsuit, claiming that many of the artworks in museums across Europe belonged to her family. Of course, those artworks had been stolen from Jewish families in the first place. Etta lived in poverty for most of her adult life, working as a nurse and later as a seamstress. She gave very few interviews, but in one, she said, "I just want what's rightfully mine. My father worked hard for everything he had." When pressed on where that hard work came from, she had no answer. Etta died in 2018, never having recovered a single piece of art. The courts rejected every claim she made, ruling that the art was stolen property. She died bitter, angry, and alone, clinging to a fantasy that her father was somehow a victim.
Number 7. The anonymous SS descendant. The uniform incident. Now this is where things get truly disturbing. There's a descendant of an SS officer whose identity has been kept anonymous for legal reasons. Let's call him Hans. Hans grew up in Argentina, where many Nazis fled after the war. His grandfather was an SS officer who escaped Germany in 1945 and started a new life in South America. Hans's family never talked about the war. They never acknowledged what his grandfather had done. In fact, they kept his SS uniform locked in a trunk in the basement, treating it like a sacred relic. When Hans turned 18, his father took him down to the basement and opened the trunk. Inside was the full SS uniform, complete with swastika armband, medals, and a dagger. His father said, "This is your heritage. Your grandfather was a hero. Never forget that." Here's where it gets absolutely insane. At a family gathering in 2008, Hans decided to wear the uniform, not as a joke, not as a statement, but as a tribute to his grandfather. According to witnesses, he walked into the party wearing full SS regalia And the older family members cheered. They took photos with him. They celebrated. But one person didn't celebrate. Hans's cousin, who had secretly been researching their family history. She had discovered the horrific truth about what her grandfather had done during the war. She called the police. The gathering was raided, the photos were confiscated, and Hans was arrested for violating Argentina's anti-Nazi laws. The uniform was seized as evidence. In court, Hans claimed he didn't know it was illegal. He said, "I was just honoring my grandfather." The judge didn't buy it. Hans was sentenced to community service and mandatory Holocaust education classes. Today, Hans lives under a different name, and the family has disowned the cousin who turned him in. But here's the kicker. That uniform? It was recently discovered that it had been used during the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. The blood of innocent people was quite literally on that jacket. And Hans wore it to a party. Number 6. Monika Hartwig, the daughter who met a survivor. Amon Guk was one of the most sadistic Nazis who ever lived. As the commandant of Plaszow concentration camp, he would shoot prisoners from his balcony for sport. He personally murdered hundreds of people. His daughter, Monika, was born before the war ended. She never met her father. He was executed in 1946 when she was just a baby. For years, Monika's mother told her that her father was a war hero. It wasn't until Monika was a teenager that she learned the truth. The revelation destroyed her. She attempted suicide multiple times and struggled with severe depression. But then, something extraordinary happened. In 2006, Monika agreed to meet Helen Jonas Rosenzweig, a woman who had been one of her father's slaves at Plaszow. Helen had been forced to work in Goetz Villa, where she witnessed his cruelty firsthand. The meeting was arranged for a documentary, and nobody knew what would happen. When the two women met, there was silence. Then, Helen did something that shocked everyone in the room. She hugged Monika. Helen told her, "You are not your father. You carry his name, but not his evil." Monika broke down crying. She said, "How can you forgive me?" Helen replied, "There's nothing to forgive. You didn't do anything wrong." The two women spent hours talking, crying, and finding a strange kind of peace together. Helen even invited Monika to visit her in the United States. To this day, Monika speaks publicly about her father's crimes, and she said, "Meeting Helen saved my life. She showed me that I could carry this burden without letting it destroy me."
Number 4. Heinrich Himmler's grandson, the rabbi. Remember Thomas from the beginning of this video, the grandson who discovered his grandfather was an SS officer? Well, his story gets even more incredible. After converting to Judaism and moving to Israel, Thomas, who now goes by a Hebrew name we'll keep private for his safety, enrolled in rabbinical school. His teachers had no idea about his background. To them, he was just another convert trying to find his place in the Jewish faith. But during his studies, Thomas struggled. He'd read about the Holocaust and see his grandfather's face in the images of SS officers. He'd attend Shabbat services and wonder if he even deserved to be there. One day, he confided in his rabbi about his heritage. The rabbi was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Do you know what the Talmud teaches? That the world stands on 3 things: truth, justice, and peace. You are pursuing all 3. Your grandfather tried to destroy them. You are the answer to his evil." Those words changed everything for Thomas. Today, Thomas is a fully ordained rabbi, serving a small congregation in Israel. He's never publicly revealed his identity, but his congregation knows his story.
And here's the most powerful part. Thomas has dedicated his rabbinate to interfacing with German students and descendants of Nazis. He hosts programs where young Germans can come to Israel, learn about Judaism, and confront their country's past. He said, "I am living proof that evil doesn't have to be inherited. We can choose differently." Number 3, the Mengele twins, the nephews who exposed their uncle. Yosef Mengele, the angel of death, the doctor who performed horrific medical experiments on prisoners at Auschwitz, particularly twins. His nephews, Dieter and Karl-Heinz Mengele, grew up hearing whispers about their uncle. The family never talked about him openly, but everyone knew he'd escaped to South America after the war. For decades, the Mengele family protected him. They sent him money, relayed messages, and helped him stay hidden. But Dieter and Karl-Heinz wanted no part of it. In the 1980s, they made a decision that tore their family apart. They cooperated with investigators trying to find Mengele. They provided documents, photos, and information about his whereabouts. The family disowned them immediately. Their father called them traitors. Other relatives refused to speak to them. But the brothers didn't care. In 1985, Mengele's remains were discovered in Brazil, where he died in a swimming accident in 1979. The Mengele twins were instrumental in confirming the identification of the body. After Mengele's death was confirmed, Dieter gave an interview where he said, "He was a monster, and he died like a coward. I'm glad he's dead, and I'm glad I helped make sure the world knew." Today, Dieter and Karl-Heinz live quiet lives in Germany. They've both changed their last names and refused to discuss their uncle publicly anymore. But their actions in the 1980s proved that blood isn't always thicker than water, and sometimes doing the right thing means betraying your family. Number 1, the anonymous descendant, the secret letter. Our number 1 spot goes to a story that's only recently come to light, and it might be the most powerful of all. In 2019, the Auschwitz Memorial received an anonymous letter. Inside was a confession from the grandchild of an SS officer who worked at the camp. The letter read, "I am writing this because I can no longer carry this secret alone. My grandfather was an SS officer at Auschwitz. He never spoke of what he did, but before he died, he gave me a journal. In it, he confessed to the murder of hundreds of people. He described it in detail, the faces, the screams, the children. For years, I didn't know what to do with this journal. Part of me wanted to burn it, to erase it from existence, but I realized that would be the cowardly thing to do. Enclosed with this letter is my grandfather's journal. I am donating it to the museum so that historians and survivors can use it to document the crimes committed here. I am also donating all of my inheritance to Holocaust education programs. I will never reveal my identity, and I ask that you respect that. But I need the world to know that not all of us are running from our family past. Some of us are confronting it, even when it destroys us. I hope this brings some small measure of justice to the people my grandfather murdered." The letter was signed only "A grandchild seeking atonement." The journal has since been authenticated and is now part of the permanent collection at the Auschwitz Memorial. Historians say it contains first-hand accounts of atrocities that had never been documented before. The identity of the person who sent it remains unknown. They've never come forward, and they likely never will. But their act of courage has given voice to victims who were silenced forever. And that, more than anything, is what redemption looks like. So, there you have it. 15 insane descendants of Nazi officers living today. Some chose redemption, some chose denial, and some chose to carry the torch of hatred forward. But here's what I want you to take away from this video. Evil is not inherited. It's a choice.
These descendants prove that you can carry the darkest legacy imaginable and still choose light. You can be born into a family of monsters and still become a force for good. If this video moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest corners. Drop a comment below and let me know which story shocked you the most. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past doesn't define us. Our choices do. See you in the next one.